Hi, and welcome to the latest and final, with me as your host at the very least, episode of the RP Book Club. Now, this, if I do say so myself, is one heck of an episode. It's longer than usual, and that's after a seriously epic cut. And with both myself and my guest, the utterly wonderful C.S.E Cooney, talking at a pace to rival Gilmore Girls. So I really hope you have fun listening to it, and you'll hear me again at the end with your discount code as usual, and goodbye. C.S.E Cooney is the author of World Fantasy Award-winning Bone Swans stories. Her short novel, The Twice-Drowned Saint, is included in Mythic Delirium's anthology, The Sinister Quartet. Other work includes Darkbreakers, Tor.com novella Desdemona, and The Deep, and a poetry collection, How to Flirt in Fairyland and Other Wild Rhymes, which features her Riesling award-winning The Sea King's Second Bride. Her short fiction and poetry can be found in Jonathan Strahan's anthology Dragons, Ellen Datlow's Mad Hatters and March Hares, all new stories from the world of Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, Rich Horton's Year's Best Science Fiction and Fantasy, and many, many other wonderful places. Thank you so much for being a guest, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rosie.
I'm very excited about this one. I feel like we've both been excited about this one over email already.
Oh, yes. Lots of capital letters all around.
Exclamation points like you wouldn't believe.
I don't even know if, like, every time I write a period now at the end of a sentence, I think, do they think I don't like them? You know, it doesn't look excited enough. It's not how I feel.
I have to do the thing that I've definitely seen on publishing Twitter, which is a very specific subset of that bird site, of like writing an email and having to go back through and like remove at least 2 exclamation points to make it sound more normal. So I have to do that a lot.
I've been having to write more professional emails in the last few months, just responding to submissions for something I'm judging. And, you know, I don't want anybody to get the wrong idea or to be unfair to anyone. So I'm removing a lot of exclamation points as I'm writing to these authors who I really respect and admire.
It's shockingly difficult. I feel like it's one of the things about like trying to convey personality over email and tone that I just find appallingly difficult.
And with the invention of emoticons too, it's, you know, sometimes one wants to convey a feeling that's just a lot of, you know, confetti and fireballs and, you know, skeletons, dancing ladies, because that's what you feel like. And then my husband will sometimes like look at a text and he'll say confetti, fireballs, skeleton, dancing. What does that mean? And I'm like, what it says. You know?
That's the feeling. It's like that's the feeling of this. It's really interesting. I mean, we're already going off on a tangent, but I love it. Like how our language evolves and how what role kind of emojis and stuff play in that. I find that really fascinating.
And a deep insight into one's inner psychology through images, you know, or you start thinking about how letters in an alphabet are codified in a certain way, and then how language changes when you have images and everybody's separate interpretations of each image, but also the cultural interpretations of each image, and how suddenly, like, waggling your eyebrows, you don't have to do asterisk, waggle eyebrows, asterisk. It's really just like, have a peach. You know what I mean?
Yep. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It's so interesting. And I am drawn to ask if Saint Death's I think you know where this is going. In Saint Death's Daughter, if Saint Death's Daughter was a series of emojis, which emojis would be the feeling of that? And is it in fact the confetti fireball skeleton as previously mentioned?
I mean, I didn't pull that randomly because I do sometimes when I'm like texting friends, like, look, I've got a book launch and blah, blah, blah. Or like, look at this nice interview. It really is. There's a lot of flowers, actually. It's like,
Oh
Rose,
yeah,
Rose,
nice.
say Daisy, skeleton, skeleton, mice, 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 skeleton, fireball, fireball, some more flowers. It's more like that.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, completely. That feels right. And I mean, I'm literally looking at it. I'm looking off camera because I'm looking at it right now. Um, and I was going to ask about this later, but since we're on it, let's do it now. Um, the cover, the beautiful, beautiful cover that I have been obsessed with for many, many months at this point.
The Kate
Um,
Forrester cover. Oh, yes.
yes. Oh, yes. It's really, really incredible. Um, Tell me a little bit about like how you found the process of the development of this cover and the individual elements. I mean, there's so much in it. What do they mean specific things? I think they probably do.
They do. And so Kate Coe was my editor who accepted the manuscript initially, and also an editor who communicated through all caps and exclamation points in such a way that I immediately felt like kinship with. And she had given several, like a display of illustrators that Rebellion works with, and asked me, like, which ones do you like? And then I liked all of them, of course, and could see each of them illustrating the cover. And not necessarily a whittling down process on my end, but maybe it was which artist was available. I don't know how we ended with Kate Forrester, but what I love about it, well, there's several things. One is that Kate Forrester has illustrated the covers of several novels, A, of friends of mine, or B, of authors I really, really like. And so I feel like there's a sort of illustrative siblinghood in cover art. Like my friend Dr. Theodora Goss did the Athena Club trilogy, Monstrous Gentlewomen, the Mesmerizer's Daughter, Mesmerizing Girl. I can't remember all the titles off the top of my head. They're wonderful. They're all monsters from like 19th century classics. It's as if their daughters grew up, each with monstrous traits, and then found each other, became best friends, and solve mysteries and get in wonderful trouble and become really tight knit as this group of monstrous women. So those covers are sort of inextricably bound with my feelings and pleasure in that trilogy, and then suddenly, like, I feel like I have a bit of a monstrous woman sibling, in that sense. So yeah, in her hair we have lots of flowers. Lainey loves gardens, she loves flowers. She's kind of a synesthesia where when she encounters magic, or she feels magic around her atmospherically, she translates it in her head as smells. So magic smells different, and to each people, and the joy. Sorry, each kind of magic smells different, and the joy that she experiences when she's performing her own magic is like, it's like the joys of springtime and summer and orchards blooming. And she loves beautiful things, a little bit because I think her family, who is a bunch of like badass executioners, assassins, necromancers, they're all very like goth, sleek, into image. And she's much more like, I love the color pink, and her family doesn't necessarily understand this or approve of it, but she kind of unabashedly, or in her own way rebelliously, maybe unconsciously even, skews towards summertime, and in her feelings and in her responses to the world. So there's a bunch of flowers in her hair. There is a musical instrument, and that is a little bit, she helps raise her little niece, and her niece is raised to be a Stones, of the Stones family, lots of like fighting and death, and like
Yeah.
be cool. Like her mother is a renowned assassin, and she wants to be like her mother. But the little girl's father and Lainey together are, they're also just like being the actual parents and trying to parent this child in a way that she doesn't die young.
Yeah.
And one of the things the father gives her as a gift is like this love of storytelling and music. She doesn't really like to read. She's not, Miss Lainey loves to read, and whenever her niece comes to her with a question, she's like, we have a library. But Datu likes to be told. She's a different kind of learner, and she'll sit and listen to stories for hours, and she is entranced with music. Lainey has kind of a tin ear, but Datu has a facility for language and music that's as natural as athletics in some ways. And and Lainey doesn't quite know what to do with her, but if that means like give the girl an instrument and let her pluck away, like you do you, you know. So that's the instrument. There's a bird. There's a character who's shaped. There's a lot of birds in this, where a lot of people who turn into birds and vice versa. So the bird kind of represents all the birds, but I think that represents the little girl's father. There's a lot of little mice. On the cover there are a lot living mice, which is great. There's not a lot of living mice in my story. When you open the book, there's a lot of skeleton mice. There are
Yeah.
far more of those in the book, but I don't want to spoil anything. There are bones in her hair. There's a dagger. There's a lot of daggers in this story. Lainey can't touch them. She's an allergy to violence, so if the dagger has done anything violent, she would probably burst into hives if she touched it, so she would mostly avoid it. But that's not to say there aren't daggers in the periphery. There's a padlock, which is really important because there's a character who's a ghost that haunts a padlock. And skulls. Lainey's just very fond of dead things. They just whisper into her, and she's like, "You want to wake up a little bit?" And she's really reluctant to let them go back to being dead once she's undeadified them, because they're her friends and she's very fond of them. And that's a little bit where her danger lies, is because this great love and tenderness she has for the undead could get a little unbalanced, at least historically. You can start loving the undead so much that you start kind of making living people dead just so you can raise them from the dead. That's the that's the danger line she's got to walk, that she doesn't get, you know, in truth, Fair Montague, I am too fond. She doesn't want to get too fond of the dead, but it's also an instinct that she can't really help.
Yeah. Oh, completely, completely. And I feel like we've kind of covered a lot of this already, but it is my job to ask this question at the beginning of each podcast, and we're still basically at the beginning, so I will ask for anybody who hasn't read it yet. Now, of course, we're recording this now. It's just under a week until it comes out, which is very, very exciting. But by the time this goes out to all of you wonderful listeners, I would imagine that lots of people have read it already. So for anybody who hasn't yet, how would you describe the book? What would be your sort of overall kind of elevator pitch version of here's what Saint Dest's Order is?
Gosh, I know what it was when I submitted it, but I feel like even since then it's changed from submitting it to my agent versus what the agent, as the rewrites happen, and then Kate finding it and how she edited it up. Everything is elevated. The fast elevator pitch was like Terry Pratchett meets the Addams family a
Oh
little
yeah.
bit. And so there's things that's more almost I in some ways it's what I wish it could be, or what I there's a lot of that intent in there. I think that there's more perhaps actual melancholy at parts than are either in Pratchett or the Addams family, though both show distinct flashes of it, and Pratchett maybe more so. And Pratchett's very mature work. He can make you scream with laughter on one page and then just feel gut punched on the next
Oh
page.
yeah.
I love his Tiffany Aching stuff. I love his Night Watch stuff. So like, or his Monstrous Regiment of Women, his Monstrous Regiment, like he, a way to discuss war through a satirization of old gender bent ballads is like it's phenomenal. And but he's actually very angry, or feels very angry at war and the state of the world, but he's not angry at his characters for doing what is absolutely necessary, and then trying to be better than their circumstances. So I would say that that is the quick elevator pitch, but I feel like like I'm still working on my craft, so I feel like I've heard Gormenghast was mentioned, and I've tried to read Gormenghast a couple times, so I think that there's like some of that atmospheric hallucinogenic language that I think people associate with Gormenghast. There's a bit of that in there, and then maybe a little bit of Terry Pratchett does footnotes too, but a little bit of Susanna Clark's Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell,
Yeah.
footnotes, as so that you don't do all the historical backstory in the middle of a page, randomly breaking up a scene. I had cut a lot, and then I was like, but I love it so much, let's do footnotes. So I feel like so I would say those four things together maybe give a better feeling of the book.
Yeah, that I completely agree. I think that makes total sense. and it's, for me, one of the things that I loved most about it, and this is making me desperately want to reread it, so I may do that next. But yeah, it does feel like it has kind of maybe a little bit the volume turned up on that kind of like on the darker elements, on a little bit on that more, like you said, the melancholic kind of pieces of the story, but it's so well balanced. You know, this is not a book that, I mean, it's got death in the title, it deals with death. Like that's a fact, but it's not a book that's going to leave you feeling sort of gutted or feeling really existential like I
Yeah,
feel like
no.
some books that deal with that can do. It's so not that. It is so much not that. um
Yeah, my point, I
it's
like if any review that says this book made me laugh or it was funny, then I feel like, oh, they're at least they got my sense of humor. Like my point was make it funny, and then and I was accused once, maybe not accused. It was observed by a reviewer at one point years ago for Bones Ones, I think, that I have a penchant for happy endings, which may be a form of cowardice, but the truth is that I don't really love books that I end up with a feeling of despair.
yeah.
And so it's definitely in the sense of like it's mythologically seasonal. It goes through seasons, or like it's structured on the seasons because each of the like autumn the equinoxes and solstices are sort of kind of major events or emotional beats, not necessarily in one year, but over a course of time. And it ends with the hope of spring in that sense. I wanted the feeling to be with the hope of spring too. We're still in winter, there's still mud, it's still kind of cold, but you know, there's some crocuses peeping up. There's a veil of green on the gray. You know, like that's the feeling I wanted to end with, and that's what I hope to give.
It's that's definitely how I felt. Absolutely. And I really needed that, so thanks.
My pleasure.
Yeah, it really is. It's you know, I really admire the ability to write like that, and the ability to find that balance and make it feel hopeful and make it fun and make it funny. um and I think we've just certainly like Rebellion in the marketing pitch have been calling it froofy, and it
Yeah.
has that. I love that. Like, how did you find sort of intertwining all those different kind of layers and all the different kind of feelings and all of that, and still coming out with that hopefulness? How was that?
Well, I feel like the froofiness is really interesting. Like I noticed it being used, and it wasn't a word I would have used to pitch it because it's a word that can cut two ways. You know, like
Yeah.
if you're into that, you're gonna be like, oh, froofy. But and I have a friend who's a reviewer who said, you know, that the book was sadder than I made it seem to be from the parts I would read out loud, because I do tend to go for the fun read aloud parts rather than the darker aspects, because it's lighter in the air. So but the froofiness really in one sense is a balancing act with dark matter. And I feel like Michael Chabon is so elastic and acrobatic with his prose, and you get something like Cavalier and Clay, which deals with some of the darkest events in human history, or at least, you know, in the 20th century. And yet, because of the nature of his prose and the jubilance and buoyance with which on a sentence level he writes, that you can engage with it, just you're so locked in with the joy and discovery of the sentences that it's like it kind of like jams you like a javelin right into the heart of what he's saying, and suddenly you're there and you're emotionally engaged just because of that. So I feel like the there's something kind of like jubilant in the language, or at least what I'm going for, like
Yeah.
being in love with language and being lavish. There's a there's so much, and when I read other people's work, I really admire a certain kind of austerity, and it's and the like sort of this fast moving plots, for example, and like really punchy dialogue. Like there are things I admire that I haven't quite mastered myself yet, but I have mastered being in love with language, because that didn't require mastery, it just required me being in love with language. And I also, it's sort of like really cool awesome gothy like badass protagonists. They there are a lot of them, and they've been done very, very well. And I've never been cool like that, but I have been known to dress up in crinoline and go to the post office with flowers in my hair. Um,
Oh,
and
I love that.
I was like worried moving to New York. I'm like, they're all cool and sophisticated and dressed in black, and they will look at me and they will have contempt. But the truth is, I go out dressed like that, and people like stop me and say, "You look beautiful," or "You look like a fairy tale," like more than any other place I've lived. And I thought, oh, all my assumptions about New York have been challenged. And in some ways, I sort of wanted to give people a character or a book flavored like you think you think you well you love Morticia Adams. Who wouldn't love Morticia Adams? But and Wednesday Adams, like I love them. But there's also like the other side of there's other kinds of characters too that are dealing with the same material, you know, like, and I just
Yeah.
wanted to engage with them a bit as much as I love like the bitterly mordant, sarcastic, glamorous sort of glowing corpse-like persona as well. I do like them, but I don't write them very much. Or if I
Yeah.
do, I end up killing them horribly.
Oh, well, I will hope to see that in the future. Yeah, yeah, it's I'm gonna go on an aside because it feels so appropriate. I too have engaged in wearing whatever the hell I liked in the world. And one particular example that finally told my partner about not that long ago, and he was like, "Yeah, that sounds about right." Um, at the age of 16, so I was very, and I don't love this word still, but I was very emo, and I had on a floor length velvet cloak with hood
Sounds like me.
and and custom fit vampire fangs
Yes.
and all of the like swooshy hair. Like I had one eye with the hair for I don't know how many years, and black hair and like the big eye makeup. And I wore all of this and we went to the zoo.
Oh, I love 16-year-old you so much. And I bet you were like, look at the zebras with your fangs, you know.
Oh yeah. But this is the thing. It's like, looking a certain way or looking like that or dressing like that. I've always been just full of joy, like for the world, excitement about the world. I mean, now it's the same. Like I don't I still have the cloak somewhere. I may start wearing it again because it's really cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's some of that is armor. Some of that is, being a certain way and presenting a certain way. Um, but it is really interesting to explore, and I think something that I mean we've talked about already and that we see in the book is exploring the kind of other side of that and the like the real joy and the zest for life and lust for life, sometimes literal.
Yes.
um so yeah, I think that's one of the things that made me really, really connect with the book even more than I would have otherwise.
I put in a festival that one of the traditions of the festival is floomping or froofing. And a little bit of that comes from a sci-fi convention in Madison called WisCon, which is a feminist sci-fi convention. And I have not been for years, but I remember they have something called the floomp, which is, I think, a word they made up. And that's when everybody kind of dresses the opposite of how they normally dress. And I love that. And I wanted to go a step further. It's like you can floomp and dress the opposite of how you normally present. Or you could froof, which is dress up at your fanciest innermost vision of yourself that you never really let loose. And that there's a line something about often floomping and froofing amount to the same thing because
Yeah.
and I wanted to just because that one little festival at WisCon, at a little convention that, relatively compared to the amount of people in the world, few people attend, sometimes in the thousands, but few people and fewer now since the pandemic.
Yeah.
This moment of joy and permission, and some of that, like the permission I felt, or the invitation, I meet so many people who are like, so admiring of certain things I do just because I was given permission from an early age. And I wanted sort of, you and I, before this started talking, we were talking about seeing those dancers, Lizzo
Yes.
dancers, the big girls. And you said if you had seen them as a young dancer, how your whole childhood would have been changed. And so some of that is I was given this permission in real life among people. So I wanted to give the permission back to people who I may never encounter or meet to be like, here's a festival for you. You could bring it into the real world if you wanted. There are words for it. Here are just a few, but you can make up your own words for it. I guess permissions have been so interesting, maybe because I'm a little bit of a rule follower. So as soon as somebody gives me a different kind of rule to follow than the ones I assumed, I'm so grateful,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I would like to go to the festival, but I was thinking about it. And but this is the thing, like over time and like into adulthood. And I feel like back when I was like a young teenager, I would have had a very clear vision of what like look I would be going for on either side of that festival, like either the peak, yeah, like absolute peak, like my new rocks, which I did have, which are like super like big, clunky, like goth platform boots with like skull buckles. I still have those somewhere. Um, or like the opposite, I guess, would be like super pink and like probably a ball gown, but like you said, it's kind of the same thing. Like it's just two sides of a coin.
Yeah,
It's
you could
kind
wear the
of
boots with the ball gown.
yeah, that's probably that's probably a good move. Yeah, it's I wonder if it's one of those things. It's about permission and about how we're expected to be that through adulthood. I feel like I've lost that. Like I don't right now. What I wear is kind of just normal, whatever that is. It's just kind of it's like okay, it's like jeans and a shirt or like yoga leggings and a t-shirt or like it's lost some of that kind of playfulness and that fun. So I wonder if some of that that permission is something we can lose over time.
I think too, comfort levels or the need to perform is also in a good way. Like so that as a teenager, sometimes one is willing to be uncomfortable if
Yeah.
making a statement. But as a slightly older person, it's sort of like, if I'm not comfortable in my body, I'm not going to be working. I'm not going to be doing peak performance, or I won't be. I don't. There's different things take precedence or importance. But during the pandemic, which is ongoing, I know, but like in the midst of the lockdown, people went. I feel like two polar ways. One was pajamas all the time, and then me. So like I'd meet people in the hallway and some would be in their pajamas and I'd be in a ball gown. So like before the pandemic, I would wear ball gowns for special occasions. During the heart of the lockdown, it's like, well, it's Tuesday. I'm going to wear a ball gown. And I feel like partly because my job had been an audiobook recorder. So like as an audiobook narrator, I have to wear basically pajamas to work because they're soft clothes, like ninja clothes. You want to make the least amount of noise possible, and you don't want to wear big tinkly earrings. So I had, as I got this career that was, you know, after training to be an actor and a writer my whole life to get this career that actually is kind of both to use my love of literature and my acting skills alone in a black box where I'm also like my introvert self was like, oh, I'm just talking to myself all day, this is great. But it's also like decreased the possibility of wearing certain things that like bells and jingles and like flowers in my hair because then you have you have earphones on and you so I guess like so suddenly I didn't have any work anymore, but I could wear a ball gown. So there was against balancing and permission. It's also what brings you joy in the heart of when it's so easy to be disheartened or it's hard to motivate yourself. Small victories like
Yeah.
getting this at all were much more important, or something that pleased me that nobody else would see became much more important because you have to survive. So some of it is I think survival tactics as well, not just presentation or performance, but joy and willpower in a time where both are being sucked away. So I think that's part of it too.
that's a good one. Let's do this one. This is a really nice listener question that I was pleased to see come in. And always something that I tend to ask about and that I find super interesting. They wanted to know, what was your first memory of reading a sci-fi or fantasy book? Or were there any particular SFF books that made you feel a connection with genre fiction early on in your reading experience?
So really interesting because I feel like my parents both read to me and all my brothers a lot. Like, and I remember the book where it shifted from my mother reading to me to she wasn't reading fast enough and me reading ahead. And that book was The Secret Garden. She'd be like, stop reading ahead. But it was the first time I could read ahead. And I remember that. But I also remember from a really young age, and I don't know which came first, chicken or egg, the Disney movie of the Black Cauldron was based on
Oh
Lloyd
yeah.
Alexander's Chronicles of Prydain. And the Chronicles of Prydain are something I read and reread and reread and reread as a child. And I think maybe I saw the cartoon for I've memories of like having balled up a ball of tinfoil and
Hmm.
like pretending it was my bauble and saying, I am Elanwi, daughter of Angarhad, daughter of Rhaegat, the princess of the House of Lear, like announcing that to my grandmother at her house. And
What did she make of that?
like I was also the girl who would like grab the broom and sing Castle on a Cloud from Les Miserables or, see unicorns in the bathtub. So I think it was just par for the course at that point. And so I feel like between being read to and I remember being read like The Yongi Bongi Bo by Edward Lear. And I remember watching like Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella with Leslie Ann Warren as a child. So like there's a lot of magic, fairy tales, language, rhymes, music. My dad took me to see Les Miserables, I think, when I was in second grade, and so I tried to read it when I was in fourth grade. So, but genre-wise, the earliest ones were. Chronicles of Prydain for sure. Susan Cooper's The Dark is Rising came a little bit later. Pretty early was the Narnia books, and I remember I was like seventh grade when my father started just like looking at me and he'd be like, where are the Dunedain, Elessar, Elessar? Why have all thy kinsfolk wandered afar? And I'd be like, what is that? What are you saying? And then he'd be like, Elbereth Gilthoniel. And I'd be like, what is that? And he's like, here you go. And he gave me the book. And I don't know how to pronounce Elvish, but I memorized it for sure and pronounced it whatever the way I chose. And I remember he'd be like, have you learned Galadriel's secret yet? And I'd be like, no. And I'm like, did you mean the ring? Is that the secret you meant? Was that the ring? And he's like, yeah. So I feel like there was like this great engaging with fantasy, but I didn't necessarily know how to discern Les Miserables from the Sweet Valley Twins, from the Phantom of the Opera, Jekyll and Hyde, from the Babysitter's Club. When you're reading, everything is just at the same time and it's all feeding. I was very into musicals, so musicals and folk songs and ballads was all feeding it, and those and fairy tales. So I feel my whole childhood was sort of immersed. Plus, it was the '80s, which was great for fantasy films. Willow, Princess Bride, Dark Crystal, Legend, Krull, so Dragon Slayer, and it was just that was also that plus the Disney movies, which have done as much harm as good and vice versa. But it was a full immersion, I would say.
That sounds amazing. It sounds amazing. And now I basically mostly just want to chat about musicals at this point because they are also a passion of mine. But that is not what this podcast is about.
Oh, it's all about words, isn't it? Words and conveying emotion through meter and rhyme and music.
That's very true. That's very true. And I'm pretty sure that gives us permission to go off on any tangent we like, which I enjoy as a concept. Can you think of any other books, movies, TV shows, any other piece of media that you would recommend to somebody who's really loved Saint Death's Daughter?
I would say for my personal aesthetic, that the thing I love the most in the last 2 years was The Great. So
Mm.
it is more violent than my book, and it is more vulgar than my book, but there is a joy and a buoyancy and a definite love of language and that kind of um, playing against expectations, the character arcs, how the characters change, how they are emotionally affected by the choices they make, and how, even though it is an alternate history, or a complete fantasy, you might call it, the kind of the boundaries of that history, the very loose structure upon which it is based, um, still seems, it creates a sort of predestination, and so they are bounded by it and chafing against it in certain ways, or using it as their excuse to behave in certain ways.
Mm.
So, and it's really like fall off the bed funny. It is so funny. It is so shocking, and again very violent, very vulgar, and you have to just, if you want it, then it, you take it, and all of the things that it is, but you have to be in the right mood. I think I will never not be in the right mood for The Great, but I can see that it would come with a lot of trigger warnings for a lot of people, but I would say that is one feeling. um so one thing my husband introduced me to late last year was something called Critical Role. So as an actor and as a voice actor, uh, and as a writer, I never played Dungeons and Dragons in my whole life. I just turned 40 myself. My husband has since he was a kid. But it's a bunch of voice actors playing Dungeons and Dragons, sitting around a table playing Dungeons and Dragons. And if somebody had told me that I would watch it obsessively a year ago, I would have laughed in their faces. But the strange new medium that they're working in, which is theater, long-term improv, the fantasy genre, and deep acting, deep immersion, and sitting around a table, and yet in my head I can see the characters and the world so clearly, partly because they all work in cartoons, and their DM is, I mean, he's like a world, I would say a world class DM, which in my mind is like he's a world class fantasy writer. But it's not just, it's like the talents of a fantasy writer, a director and an animator and a voice actor, all four combined is whatever this person Matt
Mm.
Mercer is as a DM, with the finest minds of, I mean, not the finest, but some of the finest minds of narrative creators on the fly. So all of that has been so interesting. Like, I watch it, like I can't believe what I'm seeing. This, we started with campaign 3. Every campaign they're totally different characters, different people, though it's all built in the same world that has been created. So it's a shared world fantasy that, has some Dungeons and Dragons historical aspects, but also has some completely new invented things I've never seen before. There's all of that, and then from time to time when it goes into combat, it becomes a board game, like a battle strategy game, which is, again, like I played games as a child, but not until I met my husband, who's a writer, like an award-winning writer himself, but also a teacher, a professor, and a game designer. So he loves games like Vocation. He loves games like a saint loves his goddess, right? And so I started playing games to engage with that part of his mind, and designing games even. And so for the first, but Dungeons and Dragons, I was like, I'm staying away from that. I've witnessed it. It's not my thing. And he never tried to push me into it. But we started watching this thing together. And after about 3 months, I was like, okay, you can run me a solo campaign so I can get it in my body. Everybody always says, oh, just jump in. That's the best way to do it. It's not how I learn. When I jumped in, it was highly anxious. There were too many rules. I had no idea what was going on. It wasn't fun. But after watching it and learning it through watching and observing from these great, high, brilliant minds, I was like, now I'm ready to start very small, but in the hopes of being able to engage socially with this incredible, strange fantasy improv that is, I mean, that of course everybody knows more about than I do. And I'm like, I feel, am I old for it? But anybody who loves the game would be like, no, no, no. They're so welcoming, at least from the people I've heard. So I would say, in a weird way, it has all the things I love in it, and playfulness, and really deep moments of like tear wrenching despair, and being affected by the events that the actors actually have very little control over except how they respond. And also like this complete laser focus on character arc and a beautifully built secondary world that you can see as clearly as a cartoon, and watching it all happen with nothing between them but air, I think is like part of how, if you want to see the things I love and how I feel and some of the things I think about when I'm writing, watching a few episodes of Critical Role, I would say start with Campaign 2. They've made a cartoon of Campaign 1, so you could do that if you like. But Campaign 2 is what first caught me. And it's very funny. So anyway, I would say that like between that and The Great, which is almost the only things I've watched, with some Bridgerton, which I would say for color, costume, and sheer silliness, there's a bit of Bridgerton maybe in how I enjoy things. Those are things I could recommend right now. As far as, I guess, like the darker aspects, the melancholic aspects, I'm trying to think of the feeling that's like that. There's a movie called Phoebe in Wonderland that is
Yep.
a little bit like, I think maybe a little bit like what I'm
Yeah.
aging with a little bit, perhaps.
Let's let this is interesting. Let's do this one. This is one of
Okay.
my favorite questions that I keep asking. I
Okay.
keep asking people, and the answer is usually no. And it's partly, I think, because I've had a run of sci-fi authors who were very scientific themselves, either in their hobbies or in their career. So when I ask them this question, they say no.
Hmm.
I feel like there might be a different answer here. And that question is, do you have any writing superstitions, practices, rituals, anything like that?
Rituals, I would say. And so this is interesting. Not superstitions, I don't think, but hacks maybe is another word
Mhm.
for it. Um, I think rituals a prettier word for hack, and especially so, writing is a long process. It's not always joyful. If you can get there, there's always joy in it. But getting there, it's sort of like when I'm asleep and I'm waking up in the morning, I feel like I will never wake up. I can never wake up. Waking is not even possible. Once I'm awake for 5 minutes, I am very awake. But that feeling of impossibility never goes away, even knowing that sleep fog of I'm too tired to live. But the truth is it does go away in 5 minutes, but there's no communicating that in a certain mindset.
Yeah.
And so I would say over the last 10 years, writing has been, for me, as it got increasingly harder, as it got harder to concentrate, as it got harder to do what I did naturally at 20, which was like 10 hours, oh, I'm done, like, oh, and it's the best thing I've ever written. And then, a week later, oh, I can do 3 more drafts, but it's not like that anymore. And as it got harder, I thought I was getting worse at it, which I
Right.
don't think is the opposite of what it is. It just feels bad, but what comes out is better. And
Yeah.
so there's a several year long period of adjustment to how I thought writing should feel versus how it was feeling, which was a cognitive disconnect. And then the doing it like any practice. So rather than it being natural and like breathing or like a hobby where it's fun, to become work and a discipline is different. So what I've been trying to do with varying degrees of success are like, remember this is something I love to do, but how do you remember it when you don't feel it?
Yeah.
So there are ways to make it beautiful, or there are ways to help aid my concentration. And really during the in 2020, when the Zoom thing started, what seemed to help me the most were a couple things, and that was several institutes started doing these writing cafes. Like, we're just going to be here. Sometimes they host sprints. Sometimes there's like 45 minutes of writing, then 15 minutes of talking about it, 45 minutes. Then there was the one that was completely silent for 3 hours called the Silent Writer Shift. But you had to show up at a certain hour because the doors would close. You couldn't just wander in, and
Right.
then you cut you off at a certain point. And that created a certain boundary and pressure that was helpful. So those were things that were helpful, but when when I think about it, when I'm writing and in the zone, I love lighting a candle. I love sometimes doing burning essential oils, just like a reward for sitting down is that you get a soft golden beeswaxy light and the smell of lavender and peppermint. I don't believe lavender and peppermint do anything to me except give me pleasure. And there's varying degrees of belief with that, but pleasure in itself is enough in that moment, you know.
Yeah.
Or often during miscellaneous stones, I got a whole like citrusy, like I've got like grapefruit and lemon and lime, and so I would burn those because in honor of my character who smells citrus when she's engaging with necromancy. I wanted to like, I too want to smell citrus when engaging with necromancy. So I would say the other thing a friend of mine, Kat Valente, would talk about was she had an office space separate from her home. And like the act of getting up and getting dressed in the morning and to go someplace and sitting down was very important. Like you could spend whole days in your pajamas and you could get things done. And some people get more done in their pajamas. So I'm not knocking pajamas, but sometimes for me, for concentration's sake, getting up, getting dressed, sitting down with the expectation of I'm in a ball gown, but I'm also writing, you know, like I can write for 8 hours in a ball gown. Like this like little narrative you tell yourself does help, you know. I can also write barefoot in a ball gown, which is even better. So I would say
Why
like
is that so much better? But it is though. But like, why?
yeah,
What is it about that that makes it so much better?
because if it were a film, you'd like the character more.
Oh yeah. Yep.
I don't know,
That's
like you
it.
can see it, you know. Or if
Yep.
it were like ball gowns and Converse, or if it were like, you know, bike shorts and high heels. It's the lion in the bathtub, you know, it's the unexpected thing, I guess.
Mm, yeah, I think it completely relate for sure to having that kind of line of division that like appears in a couple of those different rituals, but it's like having like a marker that the writing time is now, like the writing time is happening. And be that, you know, getting up and going to an office space or to another location, or I know a lot of people, you know, will go to like a coffee shop or whatever now that we can do that again. Um, but even if it's just as small and simple as getting dressed in something else, or staying in your PJs and sitting at the desk and lighting the candle, or like having something that is like punctuation.
Yeah.
Um, for sure that, yeah, I find that really helpful.
And in lieu of that, Carlos and I write together sometimes. So we're designing a game, so we write a rule book together. But he'll be working on his new novel. He wrote Sal and Gabby Break the Universe and Sal and Gabby Fix the Universe for Disney Hyperion, and he's working on a new novel called Fig. He's, you know, a full-time professor and a game designer among and as well as being a writer, so it's like very helpful to say on this day from this time to this time we'll sit down and I'll write my thing and you'll write your thing. We sit down together, but that gives automatically is listen to this thing I just, you know, you automatically have first audience right there, and like somebody to bounce words off of and hear it in the air. Reading aloud for both of us is like an essential step in the editing process. It
Mhm.
saves us several drafts. Reading aloud to ourselves is one thing, but reading aloud to somebody else is like the edits happen in the air, and so that's some of the best times, and that's mostly what we can do in the summertime when he's not teaching, but we do long weekends sometimes too, and really looking forward to that because it's just easier to write when somebody else is writing and as concentrated as you are and as hell-bent on a goal. It's more fun, and it never used to be like that. It used to be like me alone writing, but for whatever reason that's one of the things that's changed.
I wanted to ask a little bit about your voice acting, your audio work, partly because I'm just fascinated, and partly because you voiced the audiobook for Saint Death's Daughter. So tell everybody a little bit about that process and what that, like what actually goes into that, because I feel like it's something that we see the end product of, the audiobook, and we listen to it and enjoy it and all of that. But like, what is that actually like?
Well, so my writing process was always like write a chapter, find somebody in the house I could read it to, my mother doing dishes, my younger brothers I was babysitting, and looking back in a way that if like that maybe was unfair for them to invite them into my bedroom, sit them down and be like, listen to this. But they seem to have fond memories of it because they're very forgiving and loving. And my mother is always just loved me and wanted to hear every draft of everything. So that was, but that's also now inextricable from my process, which meant that in those years that after I'd trained as an actor and a writer at the same time, my minor was in theater, my major was in writing, and I was working all these jobs. The only theater I could be in was often like a 24-hour festival on the weekend, or like at conventions reading my own work aloud with a bunch of other performance oriented writers where we would do poetry, prose, sometimes songs we'd written. So I was very practiced in reading fiction because it was the only way I'd had to apply all of this
Right.
knowledge bought so dear. And then came a time where when I moved to Rhode Island and I was doing a lot of writing and I was working at an aquarium, and I heard from a friend that she just got an editor proofer job at an audiobook company. And by that point, I'd done a lot of podcast narration in my genre just to try to, well, first of all, I love it. I love reading fiction and poetry aloud, but also to beef up a resume in the hopes that someday, because I loved audiobooks, if there was an opportunity, I'd at least have something worthwhile to say. It was also the time that I got to be in those Shakespeare plays and a couple other plays. So for the first time since before college, I actually had some acting on my resume plus my degree. But I only knew that they were hiring proofer editors, but I also had a background there. So I was like, I will put my applications out for everything. Editor, writer, like, or editor, proofer, narrator. And I put them all in and didn't hear anything for 3 months. And then they called me in for an audition, and I was given three pieces of text to read, and I got like halfway through one, and he's like, okay, and stopped me, and I was like, oh God, I just blew that. But I didn't feel like I had. It felt pretty good. And he sits me down, the engineer, and he's like, so how do you feel about audiobooks? And I was like, I love them. Blah, 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 blah. And by like, he's like, all right, you might not love them after you do them. And I was like, you don't know me. But he's like, no, I mean, some people think they want to do this, and then they sit in the booth, and it's I'm like, you really don't know me. But I got a 2-book contract that day, and then I got a bigger contract, and then suddenly my life was changed, where I was making a living wage acting, which I went to a high school and a college for the performing arts, and every teacher and mentor I had was like, honeys, 1% of actors makes their
Yeah.
living acting. You will never make your living acting, basically. So just prepared to do other things and do this for love. Like even professional actors who make money at it can't just make money at it. And I was so excited that I went from working like a low income job, supplementing groceries with like selling stories online, hoping to write this book that would get me out of college debt someday. Like I had all these ideas about what life needed to look like from everything I've been told, and then to suddenly be in a career where, compared to other voice actors who do not do audiobooks actually pay like the least of voice
Oh,
acting.
really?
Yeah, like voice acting for commercials, voice acting
Hmm.
for video games, apparently, cartoons, and like the tiers get higher and higher for relatively. I won't say the work is more complex or easier, but shorter amounts of time, to do a script than to do like, a
Yeah.
190,000 word book. So, but I don't care because I don't really want. There's part of me is like, I'm not actually interested in commercials,
Right.
or maybe cartoons someday. That'd be fun. But I love books, and so sitting in a dark booth, also because my noise, I like being alone, and I like kind of like being with all my voices that are just me. And reading a book is pleasurable. It's not easy though, and while I love it, it's physically difficult, especially if you get really locked in and like I can really laser beam focus for a long period of time, but to my own detriment.
Right.
Where I
Yeah.
will read for 3 hours and then and like take a lunch break for about 5 minutes and then read for 3 hours. By the end of a week, my voice is shot, my everything hurts, so like remembering to take longer breaks, remembering to stand up to record. There's a bunch of things that go into it. And that's just like on a physical level. There's when you concentrate that hard and are that alone for so long, coming out of that means that you're not really good for anything else. Like it's really hard to write during a recording week or
Yeah.
read. It's really hard to want to talk to anybody because you are talked out. Nobody talks for 6.5 hours straight a day. Most people, I would say, maybe some people, but most people don't. We're not built for that. So
Yeah.
there's some, and then the other thing is that the books I like to read and the books I like to write are not really the books I'm given to narrate, which on one sense, and not always. I should say I've read some books. I've narrated some books I've loved. So we'll put that to one side. But in one sense, there's a pressure that comes off because it's like, oh, this is fun. My grandmother would love this book, and I just pretend I'm just reading aloud to my grandmother in her recliner. And as long as I know that it's keeping somebody like my grandmother company, my critical brain is like, all right, that's for somebody else, but read it like it's somebody you love and give it to
Yep.
them. My writer and reader brain, my critical brain is the shut down, shut down, shut down. Don't pay attention to these sentence structures, or stop criticizing, or like don't look at that plot hole. Like I have to put it away. But my actor self, because the acting is it's about breath, it's about pacing, it's about modulation, it's about interpretation, and it's about variation of voices. It's pronunciation. It is so engaged. The work is always hard, no matter how simple the text is. It is so engaged that it is so pleasurable to just like everything else can turn off, because in fact it's more distracting to be critical about something. It's already hard enough to read the simplest things, and to make them have meaning. So I would say that there's a great deal of joy in that, and a great deal of challenge. I'd of course love to be better, but I'm so happy that I have the work I have when I have it, and I'm happy that I don't have so much of it now that I can write a lot more, because in truth, I think the bulk of my time and discipline has been spent in my adulthood honing those skills, and there's a lot of joy in acting, but the biggest challenge is then when I'm narrating something in my own genre, particularly if it's by people I know, the stress level really climbs. The the idea that I might not be doing them service or honor. And when it came to my own book, I love reading my own stuff aloud. And I would not have objected if another narrator had gotten to it. It would have been really interesting to hear a different interpretation, but I do make up a lot of words and use a lot of obsolete words. And so I would have wanted to engage with a narrator as an author to be like, let's talk about this.
Yep.
And also, I know a lot more words in writing than I do how to pronounce them. So it was really funny in the booth, but like, have I been mispronouncing that for the last 40 years? Or at least the last 5 years that I knew that word. Woo, Merriam-Webster was just constantly open, like YouTube, looking for somebody using that word, and so just trying to hear. That is really funny and fun. I keep track of voices on my cell phone. I like have these tracks to be like, and this is this character's voice, this character's voice. So, what was very pleasurable for Saint Death's Daughter for narrating it was one thing I know about myself is I write a dense page as a narratively speaking. Normally, I can get through 75 to 105 written pages a day. They say it's about 10,000 words an hour that you can say. And
Right.
so they predicted this book at 190,000 words would be about 19 hours. And I sort of believed them, even knowing after Bone Swans that uh, getting through 50 pages a day was and having it be the same amount of recorded time as usually 75 to 105, that those like 50 pages a day equaled 3 hours when usually 100 pages equals 3 hours.
Okay.
That's how it's weird, and I don't know why it is the way it is, but they gave me a certain amount of time to record this book based on the predicted number of hours, and it was 4 or 5 more hours than predicted, even though it's the same amount of words. So I don't quite understand it, and it was a grind. I'd been kind of taking it. I've been trying to give myself more breaks and not do as many recording hours a day, but that wasn't an option. It was like nose to the
Right.
grindstone.
Yeah.
And but a joy for all that. The engineers were a joy. She loves fantasy, so she, every time we ended for the day, she's like, I really want to read ahead. I was like, you'll have more tomorrow if you don't. And that was really encouraging. And not only that, but the person who was proofing it almost simultaneously as we were recording it is her sister-in-law, who doesn't like fantasy, but she would like text her sister-in-law and be like, oh my gosh, what just happened, I'm really engaged, or like, I didn't know what was going on at the beginning, but it really caught me super fast. And for somebody who doesn't like fantasy and doesn't engage with secondary world fantasy, that also was reassuring. So the moment I would get really anxious, these other like friendly, wonderful women would be so encouraging and would just go down like, just do your job, like the rest of it can't matter as much, like just don't
Yeah.
let it matter anymore, you know.
Let's do another listener question. I think I'm going to go for this one. So we had somebody get in touch, and they wanted to know what you're working on at the moment.
Oh my gosh, it's so exciting. A couple, at the moment, my husband and I are finishing a rule book for our role playing game, which is called Negocios Infernales, which is like a secondary fantasy world that is like 15th century Spain in a kind of equivalent of its Inquisition. But what happens if before genocide happened, aliens interfered and we're like, dude, join the cosmic consciousness, don't be an idiot, you know, we'll give you phenomenal cosmic powers if you just stop killing each other. And so you play a wizard in the court of this queen who has been given these powers by what they think is devils, and they think they have exchanged, sold their souls
Right.
powers because they don't understand alien yet. And then you play a game, and it's like a 3 to 5 hour game, so it's not sprawling like D&D, but it includes world building cards and character creation and relationship, and a deck of 70 almost tarot like cards that we made up these very mysterious adages for, that our friend illustrated, a deck of 7 suits, and each suit is an element of the human, like the Terry Pratchett, like what makes a man, enough iron to fill a nail, you know, like all of that. But so we used sangre, which is blood, aire, which is breath, hueso, which is bone, carne, which is flesh, uh, lagrimas, which is tears or brine, rayo, which is lightning, and trying to think. Then the seventh, I don't know if I did six, but you know, it's all like breath, air, blood, that sort of thing. The seventh was espacio, so space, which was
Ooh.
the suit that the aliens added to this, you know, fake tarot deck from this fake time. And when they appeared, this mysterious seventh suit also appeared in the deck,
Oh, that's
and it
cool.
was like basically everything outside of human comprehension that we can strive towards. So like each suit has a different border, so you know, like veins entwining with aortas and hearts, it could be sangre, or like pig heads and like flayed men are like the carne suit. But espacio is like they're all different colors, is the purple suit with like orreries and constellations and kind of that, like that mystery. And they'll say things like every discovery expands infinity, or um, or something like, listen, be still, do you hear it, the thrum. But anytime you need to make a decision, you pull a card and you interpret it,
Oh, okay.
and so, or like, or you create your character by pulling 4 cards of different suits. One card is your motivation, one card is the magic you've received from the
Right.
aliens, one card is your role in the court, which is sort of like your Clark Kent persona. You are the Her Majesty's wizards, but you're not quite out of the closet yet because just a little while ago they were burning people at the stake. And then the last is your doom, which is the aliens wouldn't have given it to you because they don't work like that. But you are like, no, I've sold my soul. Some terrible thing is going to happen to me
Right.
someday. Aliens are like, you really want that? Okay, we'll work with your metaphor, whatever. And you've created your own doom, basically, that mechanically in the game could happen at a certain point. It doesn't have to, but it's there to be exploited. So we are so close to finishing the rule book. It'll be out with Outland Entertainment, and that's super fun. And a lot of our fiction and poetry, we do things called infernal salons with writer friends and poet friends. And we have people draw a card, 3 cards, and we give them a half an hour, and we turn the timer on, and we all write. And then after a half hour, we all read in this salon, this instant salon,
Oh,
whatever
wow.
it, from people who are still novices at writing to people who are like Martha Wells, bestseller writers. The that we've done this publicly, we've done this privately, and the stuff that comes out it never doesn't work, and it never isn't just impressive of what the poetry and prose story ideas, full short stories that have come out of these half-hour sessions. So a couple of things that Carlos and I have gotten published over the last year or two, poetry and prose, short stories, have been based on card draws we've done. But really quickly, I guess the next thing I'm really excited about is in my book Dark Breakers with this guy. This is all stories that take place
Oh,
in
that's
the world.
beautiful.
Oh yeah, it's really cool. My friend
Oh,
Brett Massey
nice.
did the cover. They all take place in the same world as my novella Desdemona and the Deep takes place in, and it's this world where there's a human world, and then just beneath it, it's the veil between worlds. There's kind of where it's like fairyland. It's where the gentry live. The
Mhm.
world beneath that is where the goblins dwell. Not like your mama's Tolkien goblins. They're a different kind of goblin. They're more like the Earl King a little bit, and a little bit like minerals and a little bit like chemicals. And
Mhm.
then so there's the 3 worlds with a potential 7 worlds beneath it that are maybe the 7 hells or the 7 heavens, depending on how you think of them.
Ah, okay.
So Desdemona, Darkbreakers, it's all of this like mortals passing through into the different worlds, or the goblins and the gentry intermingling. Their any adventures, their sometimes mysteries, there's sometimes romances, depending on what serves the story. So Darkbreakers just came out, and the very last story is the shortest. It's like a little 4,000 word story that is very comedic and light. It's like the story before that is quite melancholy, and so I wanted to not end on that note. I wanted to end on the note of like, let's go to the moon, like and so but that feeling and that buoyancy is like what I wanted to be, is like the end of an MCU movie when there's all the credits and then there's like that 5 minute scene. This is like the 5 minute scene that teases for the book I'm working on now, which is called Fiddle. I had done a first draft of it in 2020. It was about 40,000 words at the time. By the time I finish the next draft, it'll be probably in the novel range, 60 to 80,000 words. And it's like in this alternate world that I've created, but instead of being Darkbreakers takes place in like that world sort of Gilded Age. I call it the Orchid Age. So there's trains and automobiles and vaccines, and workers unions are starting to rise, women have
Yeah.
just got the vote, that sort of thing. Well, it's the same world, but in that world's equivalent to their 1980s. So it's like
Ooh.
I get to do like boom boxes and weird
Oh.
lock color swimsuits, and it's but it's like but it's with goblins and gentry and humans all mingling. And Fiddle is the name of the protagonist, who the goblin girls in this world often have spider like attributes, and her spider that she's like is a brown recluse spider. And a brown
Okay.
recluse, when they sting, they leave like a necrotic
Mhm.
hole in their arm. So a nickname for a brown recluse spider is a fiddleback, because they have a fiddle marking on their back. And
Oh.
so her nickname's Fiddle because she's very reclusive. She's kind of science minded. She works on her projects. She grinds goblin lenses, which are like lenses, except like they do different things when you look through them that aren't what we do when we look through lenses. And she's super, super introverted. And if you get too near her too quickly, she might bite you and leave a necrotic hole. And it's the day in her life. It's there's more to it, but the main action takes place on a day where she has to attend 3 public weddings in a row. So that's what I'm working on, Fiddle, and it's really just, it makes me laugh out loud. It's, for me, it's the funniest. It's the most intentionally comedic, like, just, it's a rom-com in like the best possible way. I'm trying to write a rom-com, but of course it's a rom-com in a secondary fantasy world in their version of the 80s. So that's my current project.
I literally could not be more excited. I literally could not be more excited, and I'm gonna need to read it.
Well, to get you like excited about it, go pick up Dark Breakers.
Hmm.
There's like 3 novellas, a novelette, and 2 short stories, and it'll if you like it, you'll probably like Fiddle. If you don't like it, you probably won't, but at least you'll know, either way. And Desdemona and the Deep, the standalone novella, it fits easily chronologically right in there. If you liked it, there's still more. But Fiddle will be more in a different way.
Yeah, I totally can see how things could unravel quickly on a day where you have to go to 3 weddings.
Yeah, and if 3 weddings with the denizens of 3 worlds involved in them,
Oh,
and
this
when
sounds
you're very introverted and kind of socially
yeah,
awkward.
this sounds very stressful. We should do the reading.
Okay.
Yes, let's do that. And I think once we've done that, I mean, I have loads more questions, but I feel like we have so much stuff and it's so good. And we could just keep talking. And I feel like we have other things to do also.
Well, it's been such a pleasure. So thank you so much for this.
No, thank you. It's been genuinely my favorite one of these I've ever recorded. Yeah. So thank you.
Let's get you out with a bang then, huh?
Let's do it.
Okay, well, I've decided to read from chapter 6 because there's a bit of a language change from what I'd been doing before, because it takes place on a surge day, which are one of the 4 fire feasts of the year, the 2 solstices and the 2 equinoxes. And this takes place on the solstice, the spring solstice. And what happens when you are a magic user on a fire feast is that suddenly you get this like spike of what's called penthama, the all marvel. Like basically it's as if the gods all suddenly like turn their faces and looked at you. You get extra attention, you get miracle flow, and that makes anybody who's a magic user a bit loopy on these days. So Lainey, who's generally pretty practical, has a lot of survival instincts. Her sister's pretty deadly, so she generally avoids conflict, knows how to flatter her sister, really knows how to kind of emotionally manipulate her to her own benefit so that her sister doesn't throw out a window, So in this scene, she's in an altered state because it's spring equinox, and she is not as careful as she usually is, but also far more powerful. And so the language changes, and I wanted to read that. Chapter 6. Dawn of the high holy fire feast of spring equinox, and Lainey awoke feeling odd. She always felt a bit peculiar on surge days, sort of swoony and woozy, as if she and her shadow had swapped angles, so that she was the one walking sideways and with a fluid flatness, on a plane of yellow, jewel-like panels under a yellow-petaled sky. Penthama boosted magic, but shattered concentration. For most of her youth she'd spent her surges flat on her back, chanting nonsense rhymes up at her ceiling, only to wake the next morning wrung out, wet, and ravaged as from fever. But today was unusual. Lainey felt less scattered, more abuzz, invigorated, ready to be up and doing. Today she itched. A bone-deep itch, half throb, half tickle, as if her marrow itself had taken on the job of singing nursery rhymes so that her mind could be clear. And that was good, because Lainey had much to do. Hopping out of bed, she pranced up to the mirror and exclaimed, "To do! Ta-da! To be, to see, to fix, to mix, to meddle," and grinned at her reflection. It was deep yellow, distorted. Today her mirror was not glass backed with silver and mercury, but a huge citrine set in a golden frame, and her bedroom smelled like a grove of lemon trees, and she looked ravishing. "You look ravishing," she informed herself delightedly, tying up her braids in a yellow, at least she thought it was yellow. Wasn't everything yellow today? Ribbon. "Ravishing and ready to meddle, to meddle, to meddle," she muttered, searching for a rhyme. Her reflection offered, helpfully, petal, settle, kettle. She shook her finger at it. "No, stop it, miscellaneous stones. Put the rhymes back in your bones. You have work to do. To do, ta-da, to work. To wake from the grave, to amaze, to raise the dead. Did she say that, or did her reflection? Or was it all in her head? But Lainey was too busy to ponder too ponderously on the subject. She turned her back on the mirror and shrugged into her smock. Today was a day for work clothes, homespun by Goody's own dear hands. Dear but unimaginative. If only she had some pink ribbons, or perhaps a sequined headdress, or... Why, so the Scratch Boys will think you're preening for them? Her reflection again. Not them, Lainey said, but Canon Lear might come here. You're dreaming. Whimsy wilted at the sharp tone of her voice. Or was it her reflection's voice? Some smoke or fog cleared from behind her eyes, leaving only traces of lemongrass incense. Lainey shoved her feet into a worn pair of sandals, then kicked them off again with a cry of revulsion. Ugh! What she really wanted was to be naked. Naked and dancing. Or perhaps swimming. Yes, she should run outside right now to some secret glade of the Dies Mali where she just knew, a pool of clear amber sap awaited her. She'd strip off everything, dive in, like swimming in honey, float beneath a flowering yellow sky. And maybe Duedina would join her this time, now that they were such good friends. Leave her cloak of bone on the pebble shore, slip right into the pool beside her, bare as a newborn babe. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Just Lainey and St. Death alone together, hand in hand, dreaming the whole day away. Stop it! Lainey commanded herself. To her surprise, she obeyed. And so did her reflection. Both snapped to attention. All her racing fancies faded to background noise. She flashed a huge smile of triumph at herself, who, in turn, made shooing motions with her hands. Lainey bowed. All right. See, I'm going now. Meet you in the ossuary. Actually, I think, I'll end there. It's a little shorter, but I like it. Let's end there.
I am in a daze. That was amazing. And I feel like, yeah, I've just had like a private reading.
Well,
and it was amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening.
I could listen all day, and I may well do that and get the audiobook. Yeah, that's like a classic promo.
I was in a little black booth reading for you, Rosie. Just for you.
Oh. Well, this was genuinely amazing. And exactly the note I needed to go out of this podcast on. Excellent. So thank you.
Thank you, Rosie. You were delightful.
And so I guess that's it. I really hope you enjoyed this final episode with me. It's been truly a pleasure doing this episode and every other episode I've had the chance to do, and I really hope that you've enjoyed listening to it, enjoyed all the many chaotic tangents, maybe had a laugh, and maybe even picked up some valuable writing advice or insight along the way. If you'd like to get a copy of St. Death's Daughter, as always, you can get 20% off the hardback and ebook when you buy direct from the Rebellion Publishing store. To do that, your code to enter at checkout is JBC22SDD. A huge thank you once again to every single guest who has come on the show in the last year while we've been running. You've made it what it is, and we quite literally couldn't do it without you. So thank you for your time and for being such wonderful guests. And also thank you, of course, to every single listener, anyone who's ever streamed, watched, listened to any episode of this show. Your support has been so appreciated, and I really hope you've enjoyed listening to the show.
Keep an eye on Rebellion Publishing's website and social media channels for updates about exciting new content that I am sure is coming your way. And for the last time, this has been the RP Book Club. I've been your host, Rosie Peat, and happy reading.